All right, guys, back again. For me, it's still Sunday morning, November 4th. For you guys, it's either Tuesday or Wednesday when I'm running around Vietnam helping those guys out. And when we stopped yesterday, I know it was a long day, but it was really only 40 minutes, believe it or not. So hopefully you guys are still being good for Webb and you're handling this. We were talking about formation of the Russian Orthodox Church as the connection with the Byzantine Empire has allowed a new religion to grow or to stem. Missionaries go up and a new language is written. Shortly after that, about 200 years later, as the Russian and Byzantine culture was blending, a new influence is going to arrive in Russia. In the 1200s, coming across Asia is the famous conquest of Genghis Khan. Genghis Khan and his Khanates are going to roll across Asia, and they're going to go up into Russia. Genghis Khan will unite the Mongolian tribes, and they're going to branch out as they move across Asia. One branch is going to go up into Russia. They're going to arrive there in 1236. And they will be known as the Golden Horde because their tents, their yurts, had this bright yellow, and when the sun hit it, it gave off this yellowish or golden glow. So the Golden Horde makes it to Russia, and they destroy the city of Kiev. They kill thousands upon thousands of Russians and set up a new capital on the mighty Volga River, the mother river of Russia. It runs north to south vertically through the empire. And the Mongols are going to dominate Russia for about 250 years. The Mongols were violent and tough conquerors. I mean, it's what they do. They're the Mongols. Pax Mongolica. But they were also very fair rulers. And while Russian cities and territories had to pay heavy taxes in the form of tribute, just like ancient Rome where you shot back out all the resources, the Russian princes, the Russian nobles, were pretty much able to do whatever they wanted as long as they paid their taxes to the Mongols and they acknowledged Mongol leadership. And while the soldiers of the Golden Horde will convert to Islam, and as their conquest through Asia happens, they were tolerant of the Russian Orthodox Church. Early Muslims will be tolerant of what is known as people of the book or people of the scripture. These are Hebrews and Christians. However, that being said, the Russians had to pay heavy taxes. Now, this is a theme for Russian peasants throughout time, but it was very difficult. Many of them fled westward to get away from the Mongols. And this is going to be good for trading. The Mongols control this vast swath of not only Russia, but Asia as well. And it was relatively safe. Russian merchants will benefit from Mongol rule as a new branch or a parallel branch of the Silk Road will open up to the north. This route was safe, it was well maintained, and trade opens up further contacts between Europe and Asia. The saying was a fair maiden could put a pot of gold on her head at either end of Genghis Khan's empire and walk untouched across it. Because if you messed with that, if you interrupt trade and Genghis got his hands on you, you were in bad shape. When I get back, you guys remind me to tell you the story of how they dealt with criminals and also how the Black Plague got started. So, Russian rulers will eventually use the Mongol concept of centralized, dominant, one-person control to create their own kingdoms. Now eventually, because of their contact with the Mongols, Russia is cut off from Western Europe, and they will begin to fall behind a little bit in technology. Great leaps of progress will be made in Europe during the end of the High Middle Ages and the Renaissance, allowing Western Europe to surge ahead while Russia kind of lags behind, a theme that continues to much this very day. Now, the city of Moscow will rise to the forefront here. It will rise to the forefront under Mongol rule. The noble princes in and around Moscow used Moscow's key location in the middle of the western part of the country with its great river access to help control these trade routes. They could go any way they wanted to. The Russian Orthodox Church will make Moscow its capital, and the princes there will be given jobs as Mongol tax collectors. That's your job. Go out and get taxes for the Mongol rulers. And they use this power and the money to build a solid foundation, just gleaning a little off the top, little by little by little. And in 1380, the Russian princes in Moscow will lead a massive revolt. A Russian revolt against the Golden Horde, very similar to the Egyptians rebelling against the Hyksos. And the Golden Horde was weakening because they were so far away from their power base at home. It's just a long way across Asia. And this will lead us to a gentleman known as Ivan III or Ivan the Great. Russian ruler Ivan the Great becomes known as the Great because he was one of the great driving forces, one of the great motivators and pushers behind Moscow's rise to power. And he will claim much of northern Russia as his territory. It's that forest land, mountain land, and getting down to the farmland. And he will begin to build a solid foundation, a small kingdom from which to work. One of the things he wants to do is limit the power of the Russian nobles, known as boyars. Boyar, you a noble, all right, B-O-Y-A-R-S. And Ivan the Great wanted to control Russia by himself. He is that central Mongol control. I don't want assistance, I'm going to do this myself. And Ivan the Great will marry the niece of the last Byzantine emperor and will claim the title of Tsar. It can be C-Z-A-R or T-S-A-R, meaning Caesar, hearkening a connection back to the old United Roman Empire. And Ivan the Great would claim that while he was a man like everyone else, he was also the equivalent of a living god because of what he could do. And he is going to lay the foundation for what we will all become to know as absolute rule in Russia. Now, Ivan IV, who is Ivan III's grandson, will not be known as Ivan the Great. He will become known as Ivan the Terrible. Like his grandfather, he further centralizes the power of the Russian monarchy. And he accomplishes this by brutally cutting the Russian boyars out of the government. Ivan IV will do so by working with the governmental system we will all know as feudalism. He will find loyal vassals, loyal assistants, and he will give them land in exchange for their military service. I will give you this land to govern for me, but you are part of my army. You don't own the land, I do. But I'm letting you live on it and use it in return for your military service. So feudalism makes it to Russia. Feudalism will last longer in Russia than it will anywhere else on the planet, practically. Russia keeps using it while it declined everywhere else. I do not know what to do. Is what we've done for much year, let's keep doing that. And while economic and social progress are being made in Western Europe through the Renaissance and nation building and even into the Enlightenment and Industrial Revolution, it just keeps on rolling in Russia. Russia sticks with what it knows. If it ain't broke, don't fix it. They just never realized that it was actually broke. Now in 1560, Ivan becomes suddenly more and more violent. His hair began to fall out, his teeth fell out. He would like stab a rat and hold it over a candle during governmental meetings because its screams made him feel good. I don't even know. He's so crazy that he will kill his own son, and he develops a squad of black-clad riders who would go out and get rid of any enemy, whether the enemy was real or imagined. The Nazgul, the group of riders that chases Frodo in The Lord of the Rings, comes from Ivan the Terrible's black-clad riders. Your neighbor was there one day and then poof, all of a sudden he's gone. And while this new Tsar has complete power, luckily he dies in 1584, but the secret police there, Vladimir Putin, will keep on carrying to this very day. Now the Russian people were tired of his reign, and they entered a period that will become known as the Time of Troubles, a several 150 year or so period that is going to last until a new dynasty comes to power. In 613, a young man named Michael Romanov, a 17-year-old noble named Michael Romanov, will found the Romanov dynasty. Now we'll cover this again later in absolutism, but the foundation of absolutism is created by Ivan the Great and, to a lesser extent, Ivan the Terrible. It will allow Russia to maintain its absolutist, autocratic, monarchical rule throughout history, including the great Peter the Great, on up and through the 20th century with guys like Joseph Stalin and Vladimir Putin. Next up, I should go right into the Middle Ages, but I want to do the Tang and Song Dynasty next and re-hit the Middle Ages after that, as all of this stuff is churning together. Hopefully I will get through the Han Dynasty and the rise of Islam before I leave, and you will get the Middle Ages. If we get farther than that before I leave, then I will jump right to the High Middle Ages in class. But that'll be okay. So anyway, that is it for the Byzantine Empire and Russia, which again, Byzantine Empire starts right at the collapse of the Western Roman Empire. 476, Western Rome falls, and the Byzantine Empire keeps growing because they had a head start. And we've gone all the way up into Russia and the Golden Horde. Now we have to backtrack a little bit, and we're going to talk about what was going on over in Asia at this time. A lot of people like to forget that just because in most world history classes it is Europe that is talked about when it comes to feudalism, doesn't always make it so. And a lot of this stuff is simultaneous. And this is a short, quick unit, very similar to the Byzantine Empire. So separate your notes. This is a new unit, guys. All right. China, after the collapse of the Han Dynasty, is going to see another period of internal civil war. And this period of China is going to take us through the Sui, the Tang, and the Song, two more golden ages of China that are going to last from 200 AD up into 1125. So all of this is simultaneous, all right, where we are collapsing, Western Europe, and all this other stuff goes on at the same time till we get back to the High Middle Ages on the Renaissance. It's lateral history. During this time, there will be a 350-year period of civil war. Now, during this time, there was no one single dynasty, not one. But there was a 350-year period known as the Era of Warring States. But China was able to escape complete and total collapse that plagued another empire in the West we know as ancient Rome. And unification is going to happen under a couple great dynasties. The Sui dynasty, S-U-I, which is very short, and then the Tang and the Song dynasty. The Sui dynasty will last from 589 to 618. It is the last dynasty during this very turbulent period. They began to calm the chaos, and they will begin building what is known as the the Grand Canal. And it is during the Sui dynasty, and later on the Tang and the Song, where Buddhism is going to come from India via the Silk Road up into China. And it is one of the reasons why they're going to be able to survive a complete and total collapse, unlike ancient Rome. So under these dynasties, and the Tang will rule from 618 to 907, 618 to 907, right in the heart of the Dark Ages of Europe. And the Song will go from 960 to 1279. Under both of these dynasties, China will achieve a very well-ordered, mannered, structured society, where the emperor will preside over a court. And by court, I mean it's all the advisors and the people who help out and assist the emperor. And a large governing bureaucracy will be needed to control the vastness of the Chinese empire. In China, agriculture begins to expand and diversify. The Silk Road trade route will bring in necessary income from across the span of Asia and the ancient world. As we saw, Buddhism becomes more widely accepted and becomes a permanent fixture in Chinese society. And unlike the many barbarian groups that invaded Rome, the barbarians that invaded China will slowly be absorbed into Chinese culture. Instead of laying waste and destroying Chinese cities, they began to buy into Chinese philosophy and began to practice Chinese culture. And as a result, China is able to have a level of unity that once again will bring back those, what would Confucius do, those old Confucian ideas one more time. And just to keep in mind, I don't want to belabor this point, but I want you to get it, the Tang and Song dynasties will thrive and grow while Western Europe was locked in the depths of the Middle Ages, from the collapse of Rome on up through the Crusades, till Europe is getting ready to enter the Renaissance. During the rule of the Tang and Song dynasties, Islam will grow and spread throughout the Middle East. And it is the Mongols who will finally, defeat the Song dynasty and begin their conquest westward. But first, we've got to talk about this handsome gentleman. His name is Tang Taizong. And Tang is a 16-year-old who already was a famous war hero. He's very similar to Alexander the Great, where had a young boy, or even Prince Xerxes in the Persian Empire, who as young men distinguished themselves in battle. And he followed his father's footsteps to become the second emperor in the Tang Dynasty, which is named after him. After becoming emperor, he changes his name to Tang Taizong, which simply means great general. Now, being a military man, Tang, much like Julius Caesar, like chain of command: general, colonel, major, captain, first lieutenant, second lieutenant. But he was also an educator, so a nice parallel can be developed between Tang and Alexander the Great. And Tang was committed to governmental reform. And he becomes one of China's greatest emperors in the long, vast history of China. Now, Tang looked around and said, okay, what can I use? What can I use to maintain and even help my empire get bigger? And he liked the Han Dynasty policy of empire building. And the strength of the Chinese emperor was based on how much he expanded the empire. Hallmark of the Han Dynasty: good emperors make the empire bigger. So he moves into what is today Afghanistan. He moves eastward, farther into what the Korean Peninsula, and downward into what is today Vietnam, where hopefully I am having a halfway decent time helping those guys out. Well, you're stuck watching me on a video screen. Now, Tang decided to let the power and wealth of China impress new people. So he could have just conquered them and just laid waste to them, but he's like Alexander the Great or Nebuchadnezzar. I will roll up and show you what we have, what the ancient Incas will do later on. Here is what I have. If you surrender to us, you will be absorbed into our empire. We will protect you. You can trade with us. You just acknowledge me as your king, pay taxes, and give me soldiers for my army. If you do that, then you get to keep your local government, your local religion. You just send taxes or tribute to me. And so the Tang Dynasty is also going to have a little bit of fun here with an empress named Wu Zhao. Having an empress ruling a patriarchal society like China was interesting. But it is Wu who helped rebuild the Han Dynasty's functional governmental structure in China. The idea is we want people of ability. We want smart, motivated people, whatever your social class is, to help us run the government. So schools are set up in every town and village to teach Confucian classical ideas. And the civil service exam that we talk about in the Han Dynasty is once again going to be used to help govern ability. This is what I need you to do. And as a result, the Tang Dynasty runs smoothly. The civil service exam takes on prestige. It was very important. And we're using our wealth to attract other people so we don't have to destroy them, because as a military guy, what you destroy, you're also going to have to rebuild, and that costs money. So under the Tang, land was redistributed to needy peasants. And this helps the people become more devoted to their emperor because he is giving them a gift. His divine authority is giving them a gift. While it slowly weakens the power of the large landowners. It's like the Gracchi brothers in Rome trying to take from Gabriella or Tanvi to give land to the butcher, the baker, and the candlestick maker. Old, the Tang, we're going to give to the people, get them on our side, and we're going to weaken the nobles at the same time. Before the rule of the Tang, China operated under a land ownership system very similar. It is feudalism in Europe, where I, the emperor, are going to give you land in return for your military service, and you're going to govern it for me. Well, way out in the remote provinces, these wealthy landowners just use their power and influence to dominate smaller free farmers and increase their lands without telling the emperor, while they made the peasant people labor for them. And with the people having their own land, the creation of towns and townships began. It's an eerily similar process to what goes on at the end of the Crusades in Europe, the end of the High Middle Ages into the Renaissance. Chinese peasants start to make money by becoming merchants and traders, just like the poor people after the Crusades in Europe, as we will see. All of these changes allow the emperor to collect additional taxes. He gets even more money, more revenue into his coffers, allowing him to get even more power. To help facilitate the growth, the Tang will finish something the Sui started, known as the Grand Canal. It is a waterway that will link the two big rivers, the Huanghe and the Yangtze rivers, the Yellow and the Yangtze River. This allows an access between the two northern and southern parts of China. It is a trade highway where now goods that at one time were only available to people in the south or the north can be shared. So if we dug a canal from Vermont to Georgia, we could get Vermont cheese and maple syrup quickly and efficiently down to Georgia, and Georgia peaches up to Vermont, where Ben and Jerry can turn it into peach ice cream. The Grand Canal will also be the largest canal dug with pure human labor in world history. Now, the dynastic cycle is going to run, and while the Tang Dynasty is great, it's going to start off awesome, and it's going to fall pretty quickly as emperors become greedy, they mismanage the empire, and, well, these guys are just not as effective as some others. Once again, the emperors forgot the idea of hard work that made their empires successful. They forgot about Tang Taizong, they forgot about Wu, and they couldn't control their spending habits. They imposed a high rate of taxation on their people, and the end of the Tang Dynasty will come as heavy taxes are imposed. This causes the emperor to slowly lose territory in the west, and in other parts of the empire, especially the north, invading Islamic armies are going to come from the east. To make the total collapse complete, there's a series of severe famine and drought. People saw the invasions in the north and in the west and the south, coupled with the famine. It's got to be because the empire is bad, signaling a time for us to rebel and make the dynastic cycle run again. As the Tang Dynasty was overthrown, a new period will set in, but fortunately it's not too long. Here is a picture of the Grand Canal running all the way up, linking the two big rivers. Fortunately, the period in between is not all that long. And this will give birth to the Great Song Dynasty, which will begin in 960. So it's only a period of like 50 or so years that we'll have a separation between the two. Song Dynasty will last for about 320 years. And the Song were smarter. Think of them as like the Byzantine Empire. They were smaller in size and scale to their predecessor, the Tang Dynasty. And the result of this was not only from a renewed threat by the Mongols to the north, but also because it made it easier to manage. And the Song are also going to have a food conversion. The Song become powerful due to a change in farming and agriculture. They switch from growing wheat, like grain, to growing what is known as champa rice, like champ, and then A, C-H-A-M-P-A, from Vietnam. All right. The Song increases the number of rice paddies, and if you've ever cooked rice, you take a small handful of rice and put it in boiling water and it expands. So a little bit of rice can feed a lot of people. Well, it doesn't sound like it's that important. It is. Rice begins to replace wheat as the main source of food. It increases different irrigation techniques, and the ability to grow 2 crops in 1 year will lead to a massive food surplus. And we know that a massive food surplus leads to a large population boom. The food surplus also gives the Chinese people free time. They have the time to think, to create, to invent. And they develop new ideas in commerce and art and other cultural achievements that will embody the Song Dynasty. Here we go. All right. Like the water wheel and the sewing machine. Now the Song merchants, all right, become a vast trading empire as guys travel back and forth along the Silk Road and by ships out on the Indian Ocean with the advent of the Chinese junk and the Arabic dhow. So ships are coming as far away as the Middle East. And the Chinese had perfected earlier technologies known as the compass, so you know where you are going, and the stern post rudder, a way to more easily steer and navigate your ship rather than by doing it by rowing with your oars. You know, in a canoe, if you want to turn left, paddle on the right. If you want to turn right, you paddle on the left. Well, the stern post rudder fixes all of that. Song era porcelain has been found as far away as Eastern Africa, meaning that there was trade across the vast Indian Ocean somehow, either directly or through an indirect mediator. So during this time, a wealth of cultural diffusion is going to take place between China and outside traders. And China will be the first area in the world to have several cities of over a population of 1 million. Now Rome, one single city, had a population of over 1 million, but China has several. Think of the east coast of China like the United States East Coast, all right? Boston, New York, Philadelphia, Baltimore, Washington, D.C., the big cities running down the East Coast. It's the same thing. And this allows China to be the one country in the world at the time that had several cities of 1 million people, showing the wealth and the power and the sophistication of ancient China. Now, the Song Dynasty will keep true to its basic social structure. We have 3 tiers of people. We got the nobles, we got the peasants, and because they make money off of other people's labor, the merchants are on the bottom, and then like slaves, but criminals. But the merchants, even though they're necessary, are on the bottom of the social scale. They're still struggling with being accepted. Large, wealthy landowners still dominate Chinese society. Well, anybody could be a Confucian scholar It was most likely for the rich. They had the time, they had the money to devote to the hours of study so they could be a governing official. However, getting that test score on the SAT was still hard, and only a few nobles achieved a high enough score on the brutal civil service exam that they could work for the emperor or the government directly. Many guys who didn't get a high enough score worked in a supportive role as an assistant or a secretary or an accountant. The secondary level of society was for peasants, and as we have seen throughout world history, the peasants worked the land as agricultural laborers. With the new introduction of the champa rice, they've got to convert from wheat, they've got to dig the irrigation canals. But eventually they live in small, self-sufficient farms and villages, enough to feed themselves and their families and pay taxes. With the massive size of China, the emperor doesn't have time or the ability to check on every tiny, remote little village. So these villages looked after each other and helped each other out in times of necessity. Only in an emergency, when something was really bad, would they involve the Tang or the Song government. But, unlike most societies at the time, there was upward social mobility provided you scored well and could study for this, had the time to study for the civil service exam. Not only did the boy who passed rise in social status, but his family went with him. So a lot of resources were devoted to passing that exam. No matter what social class you were from, you could rise in power if possible. So gaining an education was extremely important. Now the merchants, again, are always on the bottom. While they were wealthy and prosperous, they simply made money off of other people's labor. They had to accept their lowly status, even though trade thrived under the Song Dynasty. Merchants were always looked down upon regardless of their increasing importance and wealth. Now I was going to stop here, but we've only got a little bit left. What we don't finish in class with Mr. Webb, please go home and watch this. The next video is going to be on the Middle Ages. I'm not going to go back and try and do 2-in-1 like we are here today with Byzantine and China. So please watch that, guys. Don't screw around. Even though I am not here, I'm doing this for you, and you're going to have to know it when I get back. So we're losing days here. We really don't have time to offer, so let's lock it in. So, even though trade was thriving under the Song Dynasty, merchants were always looked down upon. Their increasing wealth didn't really matter, at least for now. And this brings us to the role of women. In the Tang and Song dynasties, women had a slightly higher status than they did in some of the earlier dynasties. But with this growing and expanding population due to the food switch, once a woman was married, she was expected to cut ties off with her family and be completely absorbed into her husband's extended family. As a result, it was at this time that this painful process of foot binding becomes vogue. A young girl would have her feet wrapped, like her toes would be slowly curved and broken until they actually folded down underneath the feet, like my fingers coming down and folding. They thought it looked like a beautiful flower petal. And you see the wide ankle and the tiny little narrow shoes. It had to be painful. The feet were wrapped, and as the girls grew, their bones bent and cracked and grew that way. It had to be very painful, but it looked like a beautiful flower, whatever. But it was mainly for upper class women, as peasant women still had to be able to move and work on the farm, and while being footbound, that just didn't happen. It was too painful for them to walk. Tang and Song achievements in art and literature. Many stories were written at this time, including the always popular stories of religion and philosophy and magic. And then there's always the love stories. All right, we got to have those. Romance and adventure. The Chinese loved poetry, and their poet Libo, L-I-B-O, was a famous poet during the Tang Dynasty. And his literature, poetry, talks about the deep connection between the balance between harmony and nature, heaven and earth, that permeates throughout Chinese history. This is when the Chinese begin the practice of landscape painting, showing their connection to the natural world, mountains and trees and rivers like Bob Ross. Oh, we take a little green and make this here a little blue and gray, and we'll have the sea foam coming in. That type of stuff, if you know who Bob Ross is. Coupled with images of seafaring and rivers, bringing all elements, wind, earth, water, except maybe fire there. What's that little kid, Ang or whatever his name is? The natural world together. Technology is extremely important under the Tang and Song. It was just as important as it had been since China developed in the early river valley, the Yellow River civilization. Chinese will make intricate things like water clocks, a mechanical clock that was powered by a series of cogwheels powered by water. So it was always steady and rotating. And, you know, like we had fall back last night, while the Chinese clock is still rolling. To weave silk into fine thread, the Chinese enveloped the foot pumper spinning wheel, kind of like the Cinderella or Sleeping Beauty spinning wheel. They turned the raw silk into thread, and the Chinese had invented gunpowder centuries before for entertainment and fireworks. Now they're developing it into cannons. Makes the Song army more powerful. One of the things that I like is the early seismograph, where you have a dragon with different sized marbles in his mouth, and if there was a tremor, depending on the size of the tremor, the different sized stone would fall out. And it didn't give you a lot of warning time, but it gave you a little bit. And one of the most extensive is the world's first movable block printing press, where Chinese characters were carved onto wooden blocks, and the characters could be shifted around and mounted in different combinations, so you could print one sheet like a photocopier many, many, many times instead of handwriting it over and over and over again. And the Chinese had always been on the cutting edge of medicine development, and so they developed different techniques and medicines using herbs to alleviate pain, to cure sickness, and develop acupuncture to relieve stress and help healing. They observed symptoms of illnesses, and what would cure them, they wrote them down, printed them off on the printing press, and distributed them throughout China. The Song dynasty was vast and powerful. Unfortunately, good old Genghis Khan is coming up here, and he will have his empire of the Khanates. And the Mongols, led by the great Genghis Khan, will bring an end to the Tang and Song dynasties. But these two empires were short and brilliant ages in ancient China. They developed simultaneously with the Middle and High Middle Ages of Europe, with the birth and the spread of Islam. And what we're going to talk about probably after the first of the year, the kingdom and trading states of West Africa and the Mayas, Incas, and Aztecs in the New World. So there you have it, guys. Hope you watched this. Please do. I'll see you guys soon.